Good morning, Saddleback. How are you guys doing? I want to say hi to all of our Saddlebacks, Saddleback Irvine, Corona, I can't remember them all. San Clemente, Laguna Woods, Irvine, Huntington Beach, Hong Kong, Buenos Aires, Manila, Moscow, Berlin. Forget it. Hi, everybody. And soon to be Saddleback, Los Angeles. I'm very excited about that. Very, very excited about that. Now, this weekend, we're concluding 50 Days of Transformation, and I want us to look at how do you face the giants in your life and at work. You know, we've looked at 7 key areas of your life. We started with physical health, and then we looked at spiritual health, and we looked at emotional health, and we looked at relational health, and we looked at financial health, and we've looked at all of these different areas, 7 areas, and today we end with vocational health, or how do you make it at work? Now, your ability to dream is a God-given gift. It's what makes you different from animals. Animals cannot imagine the future. God gave you as a human being, made in his image, the ability to see the past, that's called memory, and to visualize or imagine the future. That's called dreaming. You gotta have a dream. If you don't have a dream for your life, you're literally just drifting. You're just drifting along. You're letting life happen to you. And by the way, when you're coasting, you're always going downhill. So you need a dream for your life. It is the greatest gift that God has given you, the ability to dream. We are most like our Creator when we are creative. Nothing happens without a dream. Everything you see, every piece of art, every business, every architecture, every product, everything happens because somebody thought it up first. Everything begins as a dream. Napoleon says, imagination rules the world. And Einstein said, imagination is more important than knowledge. It is that ability to dream that makes us creators in the image of God. Now, I've invested my life encouraging people to discover God's dream, God's purpose for their lives, and then helping them fulfill that dream. And what I've discovered is that for every person who figures out their life dream, their life work, which is far more important than your job, because your jobs are gonna change. But your life work is the dream that God gives you for your life. For every person who figures that out and heads after their dream, there are 9 people who are afraid to get started. And what causes us to be afraid to go after our dream are what I call the giants in the pathway. These are giant problems. These are dream busters that stand there in your path saying, you will not pass by. You will not go any further than this. And if you believe it, you get stuck in mediocrity. These problems can be financial problems. They can be emotional problems. They can be relational problems. They can be problems with your health. What do you do when you face these giants in life? How do you face the giants in your life and work? Well, fortunately, we have a wonderful story in the Bible that shows us how to deal with the giants in our lives. It's called the story of David and Goliath. My friend Malcolm Gladwell, who's written 4 New York Times best-selling books, has a new book out called David and Goliath. And it's called Underdogs, Misfits, and the Art of Battling Giants. And so I invited Malcolm, since I knew I was going to be teaching on this text, to come and share this message with me. Let me read the initial text. 1 Samuel chapter 17. Now the Philistines had gathered their forces for war. They occupied one hill, and the Israelites another, with the valley between them. A champion named Goliath from Gath came out of the Philistine camp. He was a giant of a man. One translation says 9 feet tall, one says 7. They're very different in the translations. Wearing a huge bronze helmet and a coat of bronze armor that weighed over 125 pounds. So this guy's a big man. He also wore bronze leggings. and he slung a huge bronze javelin over his back. The iron spearhead alone on his javelin weighed 15 pounds. And a soldier with a large shield always walked in front of Goliath. I want you to give a warm, rousing Saddleback welcome to Malcolm Gladwell. Would you give him a warm welcome right now? Malcolm Gladwell.
Thank you. It's an incredible honor to be asked to come and participate in the service today. Before I started, I had a little bit of a moral dilemma on my way in. I was looking to park, and I was going to cheat a bit and try and get closer to the church, so I pulled into one of the reserved lots and one of the spaces said, "Reserved for weekend pastor." And I thought, technically, I'm not a pastor, but it is the weekend, and I will be standing up here and preaching, so I parked. So just wanted to get that out of the way, off my chest. So Pastor Rick asked me to come and to introduce the lesson today, which is about one of the most famous of all the stories in the Bible, the duel between David and Goliath. And it's a story that has enormous interest to me. It was the story that inspired my latest book, and I've thought a lot about it. And it fascinates me because it's a story with all kinds of unexpected depth and complexity. So many of you know the basic outlines of the story, which is that there is this duel 3,000 years ago in Palestine. And that's probably the best place to start because it's important to understand a little bit about the geography of ancient Palestine to put that story in context. Palestine, in fact, Israel even today, has a mountain range that runs down its eastern border. And in the mountains are all of the traditional, most famous cities of Israel: Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and Hebron. And then the western half of the country is a flat coastal plain that borders on the Mediterranean, and that's where Tel Aviv is today. And in between the plain and the mountains, there's an area called the Shephelah. And the Shephelah is a series of valleys and ridges that run east to west that connect the plain with the mountains. And if you've ever been to Israel, you'll know that that is just about the most beautiful part of the country. It's incredibly gorgeous. These are valleys filled with oak trees and with vineyards and with wheat fields. It is also, though, the most strategically crucial part of the country because the valleys are the means by which people living in the plains can advance into the mountains. And so time and time again over the course of history, battles have been fought for control of Israel in the Shephelah. And that's exactly what happens 3,000 years ago with the Philistines and the Israelites. The Philistines are the historic enemies of the kingdom of Israel, and they are a people who occupy the plain. They came from Crete, they're a seafaring people, and they were living in and around what is now Tel Aviv. And they decide they want to go and conquer the kingdom of Israel, which is clustered in the mountains. And so they start to climb up through one of those valleys. And King Saul, who is the king of Israel at that moment, catches wind of what the Philistines are doing and brings his army down from the mountains to meet the Philistines. And the two sides meet in an area of the Shephelah called the Valley of Elah. And the Israelites dig in along the northern ridge, and the Philistines dig in along the southern ridge, and the two armies start staring. They just look at each other because it's a standoff. Neither can attack the other because to attack, you'd have to come down the ridge, onto the valley floor, and then up the other side. And as you were doing that, you would expose yourself to your enemy, right? So it's a deadlock. And they sit there for weeks, just kind of looking at each other. And finally, the Philistines have had enough. And they send a mighty warrior, a giant, down onto the valley floor. And he challenges the Israelites to send a mighty warrior of their own, and they will duke it out. They will settle the conflict in a one-on-one combat. And this is something that was a tradition in ancient times. It was done all the time. It's called single combat. 2 warriors from each side would fight on behalf of their armies, and each army would accept the outcome. So this giant's standing there in the valley floor, basically saying, come on, who's going to take me on? And no one on the Israelite side has the guts to take him on. He's too big. He's ferocious. He's got outfitted top to bottom in all kinds of, you heard the account of all of the incredible armor he's got. He's 7 foot tall, or maybe even more than that. I mean, he's really a terrifying figure. Nobody will take him on, except for this kid who comes up to King Saul and says, I'll do it. And Saul looks at him and says, you're insane. You're a child. You can't take on a 7-foot warrior. And the kid says, well, actually, I'm not a kid. I'm a shepherd. I've done some time out there in the fields. I've killed some lions in my day. I'm not pathetic. Saul's like, no, you're not going. And the kid says, well, no, actually, I really want to do it. And Saul realizes that he doesn't have a choice because no one else is volunteering, right? This is all he has. So he's like, all right. And he tries to give the kid his armor. He says, look, take this, so at least you've got some preparation for going up against the giant. And the kid says, no, not doing it. Instead, what he does is he reaches down and he picks up a couple of stones from the ground. He puts them in his pouch, and he marches down the side of the hill with a shepherd's staff and this little bag of rocks. Right? And the giant is looking at him and says, come to me so I might feed your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. Meaning he's like, come on over, I'm going to chew you up. Right? And the boy gets closer, and the giant sees that doesn't have a sword and a shield. All he has is this shepherd's staff and this little bag, and the giant's insulted. He's the biggest warrior in all of ancient Palestine, and here they've sent a kid up against him. And he says, am I a dog that you should come to me with sticks, right? Referring to the staff. And the kid gets even closer, and the kid says, no, I come to you in the name of the Lord God Almighty. And he reaches into his bag, and he takes out one of those rocks, and he puts it into his sling, and he whirls it around, and the rock goes forward, and it hits the giant right here between the eyes, and the giant falls over, and the boy runs up to him and grabs his sword and chops off his head, and Israel wins the day, and the Philistines turn around, and they go running all the way back to the coastal plain, right? That is the story of David and Goliath. The kid is David and the giant is Goliath, and we've all heard that story 1,000 times. And the reason I got really interested in it when I was writing my book is that the closer I looked at the story, the more I realized that I and many of us had fundamentally misinterpreted what it meant. So we use that story as a kind of metaphor for stories about improbable victories, right? The overwhelming favorite goes up against the 1 in a million long shot, and the 1 in a million long shot wins the day. Now, why do we call David a 1 in a million long shot? Well, one reason is that he's a kid. He's a shepherd, and he's up against an experienced warrior. Second reason is he's normal-sized, probably my size, skinny and tiny and sort of very unassuming. And he's up against a guy who's 7 foot at least, right? But the biggest reason we think of David as being this improbable long shot is that Goliath is decked out in head-to-toe armor and has got every weapon known to ancient warriors in his hands, and all David has is a sling. Well, that's a good place to start, because I think that's where we go wrong. Let's start with that phrase, all David has is a sling. Ancient armies had 3 kinds of warriors. They had people who rode in chariots, cavalry, like people on horseback and in chariots. They had heavy infantry, which is foot soldiers wearing armor, full body armor, and carrying swords and shields. And they had artillery. And artillery was made up of people with bows and arrows and slingers. Slingers were trained artillery who used a sling. And a sling was a leather pouch which had 2 long ropes attached to it. And you would put a rock in the middle of the pouch, and you would whirl it around like this and let one of the ropes go, and so the rock would be propelled forward. Right? Very often when people tell the story of David and Goliath, they make it sound like David had a slingshot, right? Like it's some kind of child's toy. Slingshots are not deadly weapons. If they were, most parents would be dead by now. David did not have a slingshot. He had a sling, and a sling is a very, very different and far more lethal weapon. We have people who've studied slings, and there are, as is the case with most interesting things in the world, a group of sling nerds out there who have done all of the calculations. We know that an experienced slinger would rotate that sling 6 or 7 times a second, which means if you do the math, that the rock would be traveling at 35 meters per second. So if Goliath is 100 feet from David, the rock will reach Goliath in less than a second. Right? Goliath barely knows what's happening, and boom, it's hitting him in the middle of the head. Now, the second interesting thing is that the rock that David used was probably what's called barium sulfate, which is common in the Valley of Elah. And it's a very heavy rock. And if you do the math on the ballistics of that rock had a stopping power equal to a bullet from a .45 caliber handgun, right? This is a serious weapon. Now, what about accuracy? Well, we know from other discussions of slingers in the Bible, and also from discussions in medieval warfare, that experienced slingers, and David was an experienced slinger, were incredibly accurate. They could hit birds in flight with their sling. Right? So there is no question that what David has is a weapon that is entirely capable of taking out Goliath. In fact, in ancient warfare, slingers were routinely used to match up against heavy infantry. That's what you rolled out when you were faced with a bunch of people who were dressed head to toe in armor with swords and shields. So there's Goliath. He's heavy infantry. And what he expects is he's going to have a battle with another heavy infantryman. Then when he says, come to me that I might feed your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field, the key phrase is come to me, meaning come right here because we're going to have hand-to-hand combat. But David's not an idiot. He's not going to go into hand-to-hand combat with a guy who's twice his size. He's going to use the weapon that he spent his career as a shepherd training with, which is a sling. So here we have a guy who has changed the rules of combat without telling his opponent, has superior technology, and is filled with the Spirit of the Lord, right? And yet we insist on calling him an underdog. Why? Isn't he the favorite? You've got superior technology, and you've changed the rules without telling your opponent, and you have God in your heart. That doesn't make you the favorite? Second interesting thing about that story. It's not just the case that we seem to have radically underestimated David's power. It's also that we've misunderstood Goliath. Goliath is supposed to be this mighty warrior, right? But the truth is, if you read that passage in 1 Samuel about the battle between David and Goliath, there are all kinds of things, details that are completely inconsistent with that idea of Goliath as this indomitable warrior. The first is that he's led onto the valley floor by an attendant. Someone brings him down to the point where the fight's supposed to take place, right? That doesn't make any sense. If he's the greatest warrior in all of Palestine, why is he being led by the hand like a preschooler crossing the street, right? Second thing is that the story, the biblical account, stresses how slowly Goliath moves, right? Why is a great, fearsome, ferocious warrior moving so slowly? Then there's this weird fact that it takes Goliath an awful long time to figure out what's going on, right? David comes down from the hill, and he's got a staff and a little bag of rocks, and he's wearing his shepherd's outfit. It's clear from the outset this kid has no intention of fighting a sword fight, right? What does Goliath do? He just stands there and says, come to me that I might feed your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. He's not getting it. Why is he not getting it? Then there's the strange thing he says when David draws close and he sees that he's carrying a staff. He says, "Am I a dog that you would come to me with sticks?" David doesn't have sticks. David has a stick, right? Why is Goliath seeing 2 sticks when there's only one? Well, the answer to these puzzles has been provided by a whole group of, believe it or not, endocrinologists who've gotten really interested, medical experts who've gotten really interested in Goliath, and who've pointed out that there is a plausible explanation for a lot of those anomalies. And it begins with Goliath's size. You know, Goliath is huge, head and shoulders above anyone else in his day. And whenever we are confronted with people who are that big, that unusually tall, we usually look for some kind of physiological explanation. And the most common cause of giantism, as it's called, is a condition called acromegaly. And acromegaly is caused by a tumor on your pituitary gland that causes the overproduction of human growth hormone. And most of the great giants in human history have acromegaly. So my fellow Canadian, Andre the Giant, the professional wrestler, famous Canadian wrestler. I realize the words famous, Canadian, and wrestler are rarely used in combination. But famous 2 Canadians wrestler. He had acromegaly. The tallest man of all time, a guy named Robert Wadlow, who died at 8'11", he had acromegaly. There's a good chance that Goliath has acromegaly. And what's interesting about that is that there is a very common side effect of acromegaly, and that is that the tumor can sometimes grow so large that it starts to compress the optic nerves, the nerves that feed your eyes from your brain, with the result that many people who have acromegaly have severely restricted vision. They have real problems with eyesight. Well, now think of that in the context of all of those anomalies in the story of David and Goliath. Here's a man who moves really slowly. Why? Because he's scared of tripping on a rock that he can't see. Here's a guy who has to be led onto the valley floor by an attendant. Why? Because he can't make his way on his own. Here's a guy who takes forever to figure out that David is not, in fact, intending to fight him in a sword fight. Why? Because he can't see David. Right? And when he says, "Come to me that I might feed your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field," the key phrase is "come to me," because he needs David to be right here, otherwise he can't see him. And then when he says, "Am I a dog that you should come to me with sticks?" Why is he seeing 2 sticks? Because he has double vision, right? What the Israelites saw from high up on the hill was someone who appeared to be this mighty warrior. But in fact, the very thing that gave the giant his size was the cause of his greatest weakness. That, to me, is the first and most lesson of the story of David and Goliath, right? Giants are not what they seem. The kinds of obstacles we face in our life are not nearly as insurmountable and depressing and overwhelming as they appear to be at first blush. Look closely and you'll see a different truth, right? Giants can be slain, particularly by those who have the Spirit of the Lord in their hearts. Thank you.
Now, it's unlikely that you're ever going to have to face a physical giant like David did. But it is highly likely that you're going to have to face a whole lot of other common giants. These giants of financial problems, relational problems, marriage problems, work problems, problems that keep you from going after your dream. And in this story, 1 Samuel 17, David actually had to fight 4 other giants before he gets to Goliath. They weren't physical giants, but they were giants in here, in his mind. you are far more likely to have to face those giants than a Goliath. But they can be just as big and just as intimidating and can keep you from becoming who God wants you to be and fulfilling the dream that God has put in your heart. Let me give you a little background. The chapter before this chapter in the Bible, chapter 16, here's an interesting story. A man named Samuel, this book is called 1 Samuel because it's named after the chief religious leader that day. Samuel was the prophet of Israel in that day. And in 1 Samuel 16, God says to Samuel, I want you to go to the town of Bethlehem, and I want you to find a guy named Jesse. And you're going to anoint Jesse's son as the next king of Israel. Now, the existing king was still alive, very much alive, Saul, but God had already decided Saul's days were over. So this is a secret plan. And God just tells Samuel, you're going to go anoint the next king of Israel. So Samuel goes to Jerusalem. He finds this guy named Jesse. He says, do you have a son? Jesse says, not only do I have a son, I've got 8. And so Samuel goes, well, then I'm going to have to look at them all. So Jesse brings his 7 oldest sons to parade them before the prophet to see which one's going to become the king of Israel. And he shows him the oldest son, and Samuel goes, not the guy. Next. He shows him the second oldest, says, not the guy. Next. He shows him his 3rd oldest son, not the guy. Next. He's going, no, pass, no, 5, 6, 7. And none of the guys are it. Samuel goes, do you got any other kids? Jesse goes, oh yeah, there's one more, the youngest, the runt, little David. But he's like a pipsqueak, and I didn't even mind bringing him in. He's out tending the sheep. He said, bring him in. He brings in the youngest. Samuel takes one, looks at him, and says, that's the guy. And he anoints him as king of Israel. Now, you know what happens after this? Nothing. Nothing happens. Jesse says to his youngest kid, okay, now get back out there and start tending the sheep. Nothing at all changes in David's life. He has been given the dream. He's been told, you're the next king of Israel, but get back out there and tend the sheep. And there is actually quite a long delay between when David is anointed as king and he actually sees the fulfillment of his dream years later. There's a big delay. And I would say that this is exactly what happens in your life. And the first giant in facing your dream, you might want to write this down, is delay. The no dream is fulfilled instantly. God gives you the dream on one day, and he doesn't fulfill it the next day. No, it's years later that you see the fulfillment of your life dream. There is always a time delay. There is always a time lapse. There is always a waiting period. And in David's case, his dad holds him back from the dream. In David's case, his dad held him back and said, David, you need to get back out there and start tending sheep. He didn't think David was old enough or experienced enough to be the king of Israel. And in verse 12 to 15, it says this. Now, David was the youngest of Jesse's 8 sons, and his 3 older brothers enlisted in Saul's army. But David was held back, circle that, held back to care for the sheep in Bethlehem. The first barrier of your dream is this. There are going to be people who hold you back. There are going to be people in your life who hold you back from the dream that God has given you. Some of you know what I'm talking about. You have been held back from what you want to do with your life because of your age. Some of you have been held back because of what you want to do with your life and what the dream God's given you because of your race. Some of you have been held back because of your gender. Some of you have been held back because you weren't pretty enough or handsome enough or smart enough or whatever enough. Discrimination in any form is a barrier that you have to break through. And there will be people who want to hold you back. Now, here's the sad part. Sometimes the people who hold you back the most are those who love you the most. In this case, it's David's dad. His dad isn't going, go for it, my son's going to be the king of Israel. He said, no, get back out there and tend the sheep. Because Jesse would just as soon not have his son be the king of Israel. He'd lose a worker. You see, God has a plan for your life, but so does everybody else. And when God's plan contradicts somebody else's plan, there's going to be a delay, and people are going to try to hold you back. Others have plans for your life too. David's dad just wanted him to be a shepherd. And there's this delay, and you're going to see this delay in your life. Sometimes even people who love you will hold you back from the dream God has given you. Now, at one point, Jesse goes, you know, my 3 favorite sons, they're out on the front line with Saul fighting the battle. And he tells David, I want you to take a care package of food to your older brothers at the battlefield. So he gives David all this food, and he sends him off. And this way, David gets to see the battle. And when he's there delivering the foods to his older brothers, he hears Goliath coming down every day and shouting these taunts and saying, we're going to, whip your rear, and we're going to win the battle, and you guys are all going to be defeated. And David notices nobody's doing anything about this guy. And he notices everybody around here is scared to death. They're all embarrassed. They're all afraid. They're all terrorized. They're all traumatized. Nobody wants to do anything. They're all scared to death. And this is the second barrier you will face in finding and fulfilling your dream. And it is this: discouragement. You will face discouragement because everybody around you is scared to death. Nobody thinks you can do it. Nobody has hope. Nobody believes that you can take down this giant. And they're all scared to death, and they're all convincing each other that it's impossible to make any difference. You see, Goliath had created a climate of fear in Israel, and everybody had concluded, we're going to lose this battle, and nobody can beat Goliath. In verses 8 to 10, it says this: each day Goliath would stand and shout at the ranks of Israel's army. He would say, why do you come out here and line up for battle? Choose one man to fight me, and if he's able to kill me, we'll become your subjects. But if I kill him, you'll become our subjects and serve us. Day after day, circle that, day after day, Goliath taunted them, saying, this day I defy the ranks of Israel. And when Saul, that's a king, and Israelites heard this, everyone was deeply shaken and paralyzed with fear. Now notice the situation. They're all demoralized. They're gripped with anxiety. They're terrified. They're traumatized. They feel hopeless. One translation says they were so frightened they couldn't do anything. Have you ever been in a situation where everybody around you thought this is hopeless? Maybe you have been at work and in your office say, hey, in this economy, nobody can grow anything. We can't solve this problem. It's going down the tubes. And everybody around you is saying, it can't be done, it can't be done, it can't be done, it's never gonna happen, it's never gonna happen. And they're all discouraged, and they're all convincing each other because they're all filled with fear. And they say, there's nothing we can do about this problem. Let me tell you something. Conventional wisdom is often wrong. It is often wrong. Everybody there was wrong. It says there twice in that passage, Goliath challenged the ranks of the Israeli army. Sometimes the solution has to come outside the rank and file. What you need is a little kid from a village to come in and go, we can do this. What you need is a fresh set of eyes, because the professionals were wrong. The crowd was wrong. Just because everybody says it's so doesn't make it so. The crowd is often wrong. Just because somebody says the crowd says it's true doesn't mean it's true. And so somebody had to challenge the status quo. Now, why had everybody given up? Why had they all gotten so discouraged from this one giant? And the answer is they were listening to the wrong voice. They were listening to this guy every single day. Look at the next verse, verse 16. For 40 days, twice a day, morning and evening, the Philistine giant loudly berated the Israelite army. Well, it's no wonder. They got discouraged. They're listening to this guy day after day after day after day. Question, who are you listening to? Who are you listening to who says it can't be done? Who is poo-pooing your dream, putting down your dream, saying it won't ever happen, forget it? Who is telling you that you're not the person to do it? You know, if you listen to negative people long enough, you know what happens? You get negative because it's highly contagious. Maybe one of the best things you should do is stop listening to talk radio. Because it is negative, 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 negative. And you know what? If you listen to it negative, you know what you're going to become? A negative, bitter person. And if you listen to people who are against every day of your life, guess what? You end up being against everything. Negativity is contagious, and so is fear, and so is discouragement. And if you listen to somebody who said, America's going to hell in a handbasket day after day after day, pretty soon you start acting like it. And you believing it. Now, sometimes you just need a fresh voice. You need a kid from the village with fresh eyes. Go, this guy's nothing. We can take him down. It's a slam dunk. Look in the next verse, verses 23 and 24. As David talked with his brothers on the front line, he saw Goliath start shouting his usual threats to Israel's army. And when the army heard Goliath, they all ran away in terror. They all ran away. Let me give you some advice. Don't hang out with fearful people. Don't hang out with fearful people. Because if you do, you will become fearful. If you hang out with cowards, you become a coward. You hang out with bitter people, you become bitter. You hang out with angry people, you become angry. You hang out with negative people, you become negative. It's highly contagious. The first barrier to your dream is delay. Somebody's trying to hold you back. But the second barrier to your dream, the second dream buster, is discouragement, because everybody around you is telling you that life sucks and it can't be done. And they're wrong. They're wrong. Now there's a third dream buster, and I call it the giant of disapproval. And David had to handle this one, is he had to be willing to face the disapproval of people around him in order to go after his dream, and you will too. Now here's the problem. The reason why most people don't ever go after their dream is they are afraid of disapproval. They are afraid of rejection. In this case, David's own brother questioned his motives. David's own brother questioned his motives and disapproved of David even going after the giant. We want everybody to like us. I mean, we really do. We want everybody to approve of everything we do. But if you go after God's dream for your life, I'm guaranteeing you this. There will be naysayers. There will be critics. There will be misunderstanding. There will be attacks. There will be people who are judging you for what you do because they don't get it. And that is the disapproval giant. In this case, David's own brother questions David's motivation, and he treats his younger brother with disdain and disgust, and he demeans him, and he disregards him, and he belittles him. In verse 28 and 29, notice this conversation between the older brother and the younger brother. And David's there on the front line, and he asks the soldiers, what's the reward for killing this Philistine and ending this disgraceful abuse? He said, what's the reward? Now, when David's older brother heard David, and even asked this question, he burned with anger at David. And he said, now listen to this conversation and see if you can identify with it. David's older brother says, why are you here anyway? Why aren't you taking care of your scrawny little flock of sheep? You cocky little brat. I know how conceited you are. And David, the younger brother, goes, now what have I done? Can I even ask a question? Do any of you vaguely relate to this conversation? Yeah, it's called sibling rivalry. And it's happened in every single family. Because the older brother and the younger brother, the people closest to you can't see what you see. They can't imagine you accomplishing something that they've never imagined themselves. They think they know who you are, but they don't know you like God knows you. And so they come out with this demeaning, demoralizing disapproval. You hear the family dynamics going on here. The sad truth is this: sometimes it is your own family that doesn't want you to accomplish God's dream. It may be envy, it may be jealousy, it may be they think they know you better than you do and they know your weaknesses, but they don't know God's strength. It may be that they would be embarrassed. It may be that they would resent you being successful and it would make them look bad. I don't know really what it is, but sibling rivalry often leads to resentment. Did you know that even Jesus had to deal with this? You know, Jesus was born of a virgin. Mary and Joseph hadn't had sex because God was the father of Jesus. But the Bible tells us very clearly that after Jesus was born, later on, Joseph and Mary had many kids. In fact, we're given their names in the Bible. In fact, Mary and the kids followed Jesus around during his ministry. Now, what is interesting is that none of Jesus' half-brothers or sisters accepted him as Lord and Savior until after the resurrection. And then they all became believers. Because when your brothers died on the cross, and then 3 days later he's walking around talking to you, that would make me a believer. Okay. But I have to, show a little grace to these guys because I wouldn't want to believe in my brother either. If my brother said, by the way, I'm God, yeah, you and who else? Okay. How would you like to have Jesus as your old brother, Mr. Perfect? I mean, there's noise going on, and the mom walks in, and Mary goes, what's going on in here, kids? Well, Jesus did it. No, you guys know he didn't do it. Mom, he lied. Jesus never lies. But Mom, how would you like to have a brother who was always right? That would be hard growing up in that family, okay? And so I can see every reason why they would not accept him as the Messiah until after his death and resurrection. But even Jesus had to deal with the sibling rivalry. Because a brother or a sister will often say, who do you think you are when you have a dream? I'll never forget when this church many years ago bought this piece of land, 120 acres. And Saddleback was a much smaller church at the time. And the word got out of the community that this little church was going to go buy 120 acres in Orange County. And said, yeah, who else? And the word got out around this community. Those people over there at Saddleback Church, who do they think they are? And I remember having to address it in a service, and I had to stand up and say, folks, you've heard this rumor going around, people saying, who do those people think they are? I mean, do they think they're special or something? And I had to say, that's not the question. That's the wrong question. The question is not who do we think we are. The question is, who do we think God is? You let the size of your God determine the size of your goal. And if you have a big God, you better have some big goals, because God doesn't give you piddly dreams. If a dream is from God, how do you know if your dream's from God? It's so big, you're bound to fail unless God bails you out. The dream will be so big, you are guaranteed failure unless you totally depend on God to see it happen. It's just outrageously enormous. It's a big dream from a big God. The wrong question. The right question is, who do we think God is? Let the size of your God determine the size of your goal. Now listen, when God gives you a dream, and it's a dream that other people are afraid to attempt, or afraid to accomplish, or afraid to even step out and try, if you take that dream and you go for it, you will be misjudged, you will be maligned, you will be misinterpreted, and you will be misunderstood. That is the giant of disapproval. And you have to decide what matters more to you, the approval of other people or the approval of God. I decided a long time ago that the approval of God is more important to me than the approval of other people. And it's not my job, it's none of my business what you think of me. It is my business what God thinks of me. And that's the issue of disappointment. Now, there's one other dream buster. Oh, by the way, David did find out what the reward would be. Did you know what the reward would be for killing Goliath? It was 3 things. Number 1, the king would give you great wealth. Number 2, you got to marry the king's daughter. And number 3, this was the best of all, you were exempt from taxes the rest of your life. Hello, shoot, I would have gone after, Goliath for that one. No taxes for the rest of my life? Yeah, well, that was the reward. But then there's the 4th dream buster that David had to face even before he faced Goliath, and it is the giant of doubt. First, there is delay, then there's discouragement, then there's disapproval, and then there's doubt. Am I capable for this? Am I up to the task for this? Can I actually do what God is asking me to do? And then there are people all around you who tell you you can't. And in David's case, the expert doubted his ability. Now, there was nobody who was a greater expert on war than King Saul, because Saul had been in battle his entire life. And when King Saul, hears that this little kid is willing to take on the giant who's paralyzed the nation, he invites David to come see him at the palace. So David goes to see King Saul, and here's the conversation, verse 32 and 33. David says to the king, "Don't worry about a thing, king." David told the king, "I'll fight this Philistine." And by the way, let me just stop right here. Confidence in God is often misinterpreted as cockiness by other people. A lot of people might think a person is cocky when they're just a person of faith. It's not that they think that they can do it, it's that they know God can do it. That's confidence in God, not cockiness. David says, "Don't worry about a thing, king. I'll fight this Philistine." "Don't be ridiculous," Saul replied. "There's no way you can go against this Philistine. You're only a boy, and he's been a professional warrior all his life." Now that expert is saying you can't do it. And there's enough to make you start doubting yourself. I will say it about experts that I said about conventional wisdom. The experts are often wrong. They're often wrong. I remember when I'm a Californian, but I went to seminary in Texas. And when I went to seminary in Texas, while I was there, God gave me a dream of moving to Southern California, to a city I'd never been in, and to start a church with no money, no members, no building, and no support, and I'd never been a senior pastor. And so I called up an expert on starting churches in Texas. His name was Gene. And I called him up and I said, "Hey, I'm thinking about graduating, going to Southern California, starting a church with no money, no members, no building, no support, and I've never been a senior pastor. What do you think?" And this expert said, "That's the dumbest idea I've ever heard." He said, "Rick, if you do that, you will never be heard from again." 20 years later, he called me back. He said, "That was the dumbest advice I ever gave in my life. I was dead wrong on that." Okay? Now, I remember when I wrote Purpose-Driven Life, I got a letter from the editor. I framed it. It said, "This book will never work. Nobody's going to read 40 chapters." The experts are often very wrong. Very, very wrong. So, there's this doubt that comes. Now, how do you defeat these giants that are keeping you from being the man God wants you to be? How do you defeat these fears that are keeping you from being the woman God wants you to be? To be a person of great faith with a great dream and a great life work. How do you overcome those giants? You do the very things that David did. Quickly, let me just give them to you. The 4 things that David did to defeat these giants before he gets to Goliath. Number 1, I remember how God has helped me in the past. That's the first thing you do to face the giants and to fulfill your dream. Remember how God has helped me in the past. This is a confidence builder. When I recall, when I recollect, when I remember ways that God has helped me in the past, it gives me confidence for the future. I say, remember those times I thought I wasn't going to make it, but I did. And I remember that time I thought it was the end, but it wasn't. And remember I thought I was at the bottom and I was never going to climb out, but I did. And remember when I thought I was all alone, but I wasn't. And you remember how God has helped you in little times and realize He's going to help me in big times in the future, because God never changes. God doesn't love you one day and not another day. And if He helped you in the past in little ways, He will willingly help you in the future in big ways. You remember how God has helped you in the past. This is what David did, verse 36. David says, when everybody tells him it can't be done, he says, you know, in protecting my sheep as a shepherd, I've killed both a lion and a bear. And the Lord who delivered me from the teeth of that lion and the claws of that bear will surely now deliver me from this Philistine too. That's confidence. I remember how God's helped me in the past. Number 2, I use the tools that God has given me now. I use the tools that God has given me now. I don't wait for something I don't have. I don't have enough money. I don't have enough education. I don't have enough connections. I don't have enough opportunities. I don't have this or I don't have that. No, you use the tools you've got right now. Now, some people are just waiting for something to happen. You don't wait for your ship to come in. You swim out to it. Because if you wait for it to come into the harbor, you're going to wait a long, long time. You use the tools God has given me now. Now, David goes to see Saul, and Saul says, well, if you're going to fight this guy, you may as well use my armor. How ridiculous is that? David is a short, small boy. Saul is a tall, big, grown man. To take his armor and put it on David, his hands probably didn't even show through it. It would be comical. And David says this, verse 38 to 40, then Saul dressed David in his own armor. But David said, if I can't go out in these, he said, I can't go out in these because I'm not used to them. So he took them off. Instead, he chose 5 smooth stones for his sling. He goes, this is what I'm used to. I know how to use a slingshot. I don't need your armor. I'm going to just do this. Now, let me just say this. When you start going after your dream that God has given you, some people are going to oppose you on it. They're going to be opposition. But other people say, oh yeah, go ahead and go after your dream, but do it my way. And they're going to try to convince you to do it their way, but you're not them, and it's going to fail. I see this Saul's armor syndrome in businesses everywhere. Well, they're doing it that way, so we should do it that way. Well, not necessarily. Because God doesn't create clones. God made you to be you, and God's going to use you to fulfill the dream He has for you, your way, not the way somebody else did it. And if you try to do it the way somebody else did it, you are bound to fail. It's like trying to wear Saul's armor. You can't wear it because you're not Saul. You just need to use the tools you got. He had a slingshot, so he picks up some stones, and he's going to go after it. Often people will try to load some things on you that are just too heavy for you, and you're not going to fulfill your dream that way. I love this verse in Ecclesiastes 11. Look up here on the screen. Verse 4 says, if you wait for perfect conditions, you'll never get anything done. How many of you agree with that verse? Yeah. If you wait for perfect conditions, you're never going to get started on your dream. Someday one of these. No, today's the day. We're ending 50 days of transformation. This is the day to start the new dream. This is the day to go after it. And when everybody else is saying, you can't do it, discouragement. And when you're full of doubt, you're going to trust God. And when there's been a delay and people have held you back, and when people disapprove, you just say, sorry, I've got to do what God's asking me to do. Number 3, the third thing he did is ignore the dream busters. You must ignore the dream busters in your life. Now, it is interesting to me that as David's going to take on a giant that everybody else is scared to death to take on, he didn't get any encouragement from anybody. Not a single word of encouragement as he's going out on this job. His dad didn't encourage him. His mom didn't encourage him. His brothers didn't encourage him. The army, the soldiers who are scared to death, didn't encourage him. The king, whose reputation is on the line, didn't encourage him. Nobody gave David any encouragement. What did he do? He had to encourage himself in the Lord. Look at the next verse. 1 Samuel 30, verse 6. When others were speaking against him, David, read it with me, encouraged himself in the Lord. Circle in the Lord. Do you do that? Do you encourage yourself in the Lord? Now, this is so important. If you're going to go after your dream, you're going to have to learn how to encourage yourself, because sometimes nobody else is going to encourage you. And you're going to have to encourage yourself in the Lord. Now, this is very, very different from simply having a positive mental attitude. No, this is far more deep. When you encourage yourself in the Lord, there is a bedrock trust in God's faith, God's grace, God's provision, God's security, God's kindness, God's power. You're trusting in God. It's not just a positive mental attitude. Now, I'm not against positive thinking. I mean, considering the alternative, I think you ought to be a positive thinker, because the alternative is negative thinking, and that's worse. So between negative and positive thinking, you ought to be a positive thinker. But friends, there are some problems in your life that are so significant and some giants so big, all the positive thinking in the world isn't going to make a difference at all. The sun will come out tomorrow, have a nice day, is just pretty shallow when you're facing the deepest, darkest problems of life. When you've had a son who struggled with mental illness for 27 years, all the positive thinking in the world is worthless. Well, just feel better. Put a smile on your face. Think good thoughts. Believe, have fun. So, no, you need something far deeper than that. In the deepest, darkest days of life, you need a bedrock trust in God's grace, in God's love, in God's power, in God's sovereignty, in God's plan. And you have to encourage yourself in the Lord, because nobody else can give you that encouragement. Number 4, the fourth thing David did, I expect God to help me for his glory. I expect God to help me for his glory. This is what David did. This is what you must do in going after your dream. It is the faith factor. I love what David says to Goliath as he runs onto the battlefield. David runs onto the battlefield shouting, and he says this, David shouted to Goliath, "You come at me with sword and with spear and with javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord Almighty. And today the Lord will conquer you." Not me, the Lord will conquer you. And the whole world will know that there is a God. And everyone will know that the Lord doesn't need weapons to rescue his people. It is his battle, not ours. Are you fighting God's battle, and that's why you're tired? It is his battle, not ours. And the Lord will give you to us. What are you expecting God to do in your life? Without even knowing you, I can tell you this, God is doing exactly what you expect him to do. No more and no less. Because every time God moves out of heaven and moves on earth and does a miracle, it's because somebody believed. The Bible says, according to your faith, it will be done unto you. The Bible says the just shall live by faith. The Bible says without faith, it is impossible to please God. The Bible says whatever is not of faith is sin. According to your faith, it will be done to you. You get to choose how much God does in your life. It's based on how much you choose to trust him. I don't have to be the smartest person in life. I don't have to be the best looking person in life. I don't have to be the wealthiest person in life. I have a choice to trust God. And you do too. Whatever is not of faith is sin. He said, I expect God to help me for his glory. I made this decision when I was a young man. And in the mountains of Northern California, one night I got down on my knees And as a young man, I said, God, I'm not the smartest guy. I'm not the most educated, and I'm not the best looking, and I'm not the most talented. But God, by your grace, I'm going to trust you. And I don't have to know or understand why you tell me to do what you want me to do, but I will do anything, anytime, anywhere, in faith, even when it doesn't make sense to me. And what an adventure my life has been. I would have never imagined as a teenager that one day I would stand and speak to a crowd like this, much less to all of our campuses around the world. Because this group right here is about 5 times bigger than the town I grew up in. I'm a country boy with a slingshot. And God says, I will use anybody who will trust me and say, I expect God to use me, not because of who I am, but for his glory, that God knows and the world knows that there is a God. I'll never forget looking into my wife's eyes many years ago as we were finishing up school in Texas. And I said, okay, I think God has given me a dream, and it is to be a pastor. And I think we're supposed to go to Southern California, to a place we've never been, and start a church with no money, no members, no building, no support. And I've never been a senior pastor. And I said, what do you think about that dream? And she looked into my eyes and she says, it scares me to death. But I believe in God, and I believe in you. So let's go. Let's go for it. Now, I've often thought, how would history be different if my wife had said no? If she'd been afraid and scared and said, let's don't do it. There would be no Saddleback Church. There would be no purpose-driven life. There would be no movement of churches in 160 nations. There would be no peace plan. Thousands of people that are going to heaven now would not be headed to heaven. You have no idea how much your unbelief could be limiting somebody you love. Is your unbelief limiting your wife? Is your unbelief limiting your husband? Is your unbelief limiting your child? Don't be Jesse. Don't hold them back when God has a great dream for their life. It's not your dream for them. It's God's dream for them. And you need to say, I'm not going to let anybody else's unbelief hold me back, and I'm not going to let my unbelief hold anybody else back. Let's bow for prayer. There are a lot of things in your life you don't have control over. You didn't choose your natural talent. You didn't choose when you would be born, where you would be born. You didn't choose your race. You didn't choose your gender. You didn't choose your talent. But you do get to choose how much you're going to trust God. And it is that faith factor that will defeat the giants of delay and discouragement and disapproval and doubt. And if you will say yes to God, He will take you on the adventure of your life. It doesn't really matter what's happened in your life. If you say, I want the rest of my life, no matter how many years I've got, to be God's, 100%. I want you to pray this prayer. Dear God, you have helped me many times in the past. You've helped me through things I thought I'd never get out of, but you did help me. And if you've helped me in the past, I know you're going to help me in the future. Help me to remember that and draw my confidence from that. Even when people discourage me or disapprove of me, or even when people misunderstand me. Help me to use the tools that you've given me now, to not wait for a perfect time and a perfect place and a perfect tool, but to use the slingshot and the stones that I have right now. Help me not to wear somebody else's armor, but to just go in your strength. And Lord, help me to ignore the dream busters. And help me to start every day with a time alone with you so that I will encourage myself in the Lord. That I don't need the encouragement of other people because I'm encouraging myself in the Lord and spending time with you. Help me to expect you to help me, not for my glory, but for yours, that the whole world will know that there is a God, and that everyone will know that the Lord doesn't need weapons to rescue his people. Lord, I've been tired because I've been trying to fight battles as if they're mine. It's your battle. I want to relax and trust you to give me the victory. Jesus Christ, I invite you into every room in my life. The living room, the bedroom, the bathroom, the kitchen. I want you to run every area of my life. I want you to be the manager and the Lord from this day forward. And I thank you in advance that the giants will fall and the dream will come true. And I pray this in your name. Amen.